Boy gives his only jacket to a millionaire disguised as a beggar. The next day, he finds a fortune at his door. Derek's breath was visible in the cold Detroit air. The streets were mostly empty, just a few cars driving by, and some people rushing to get home before nightfall. He had his hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to keep them warm. His jacket, though worn, was doing its best to keep the chill off his back. He walked past a laundromat, then the familiar corner store where he sometimes picked up groceries for his mom. The bags under his eyes were heavier today. School had been a drag, and afterward, he'd done an odd job clearing someone's yard. He didn't get much for it, but it was better than nothing. He needed that little extra bit of money. Rent was coming up, and his mom was already stressed. Every penny helped. "Yo, Derek!" someone called. He turned to see Mike, a guy from his neighborhood, bundled in a heavy coat and smoking a cigarette. "What's up, Mike?" Derek said, slowing his pace a bit. Mike shrugged. "Same old, man. You good?" "Yeah, just heading home." Derek gave a small wave and kept walking. "Stay warm, bro. It's freezing out here," Mike shouted after him. "Trying my best," Derek mumbled, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers were stiff, and he flexed them in his pockets to keep them from going numb. As he walked further down Main Street, Derek noticed an old man sitting against the brick wall of an abandoned shop. The man was huddled, arms wrapped around his knees, his face turned down to his chest. He wore layers of thin clothing, but they were clearly not enough. His lips were blue, and he shivered violently, like he had no control over his own body. The sight made Derek pause. He stood there for a moment, just staring. He could hear his own breathing, see the way the cold air puffed out in front of him. The old man looked up, just for a second, and their eyes met. Derek's chest tightened. He knew that look, like someone was lost, just holding on by a thread. Derek walked over, digging through his pocket. He pulled out the loose change he'd earned from cleaning that yard earlier. He crouched down and held it out to the old man. "Here, sir," Derek said, his voice low, almost hesitant. The old man looked at the coins, then at Derek. He didn't take the money. He just shook his head, his eyes distant, lost. "Come on, take it," Derek insisted. "It's not much, but it might help you get something warm." The old man gave a weak smile, but still didn't move. His hands remained wrapped around his knees, his fingers bony and shaking. Derek stayed there for another second, feeling a pit forming in his stomach. The man was clearly freezing. The coins wouldn't do anything. Not really. He could hear a car passing by behind him, the sound of tires on the wet road. He could feel his own heart beating faster as he looked at the man's trembling frame. Derek stood up, feeling the cold sink even deeper into his bones as he did. He looked at his own jacket. It wasn't much, but it was warm. It was his only jacket, though, and winter was just getting started. His mom would flip if he showed up without it. She'd worry herself sick, and without it, he'd be out in the cold, too. He hesitated, glancing up and down the street. A couple of people passed by, their eyes darting towards the old man, and then quickly looking away, like they didn't want to see. Derek chewed on his lip. His fingers brushed the zipper of his jacket. He looked back at the man. His lips were still blue, and his eyes had closed again, like he was trying to block out the cold. Maybe the world itself. "Damn it," Derek muttered under his breath. He knelt back down. "Sir, listen." He started unzipping his jacket, feeling the rush of cold air against his chest. He slid it off his shoulders and draped it over the man's back. "You need this more than I do. Just take it, all right?" The old man opened his eyes, blinking at Derek like he couldn't quite believe it. His lips trembled, but no words came out. "It's okay," Derek said, his voice shaking just a little. "I'll be fine. You just stay warm, all right?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, his hand coming up to touch the jacket like he couldn't believe it was real. Derek stood back up, his body already shivering from the cold. He hugged his arms around himself, trying to keep in whatever warmth he had left. The sky was getting darker, and he needed to get home. His mom would be worried. He started walking again, faster this time. His teeth chattered, and his feet felt like they were blocks of ice. The cold cut through his thin shirt like a knife, making his skin prickle and tighten. But he kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, focusing on the sound of his shoes on the pavement. "Hey!" He heard someone shout from behind, but he didn't look back. He didn't want to explain, didn't want anyone to stop him and tell him he was crazy for giving away his only jacket. He just kept moving. By the time he got to his building, his fingers were numb, and he could barely feel his nose. He fumbled with the door handle, finally managing to get it open, and stumbled inside, breathing heavily. The warmth of the hallway was a small relief, but it wasn't enough to chase away the deep cold in his bones. He made his way up the stairs, his legs feeling heavy. When he got to the door of his apartment, he knocked. The door swung open, and his mom stood there, her eyes widening when she saw him. "Derek, where's your jacket?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. She pulled him inside, her hands on his shoulders, looking him up and down. "What happened?" Derek forced a smile, trying to play it off. I gave it to someone who needed it more, Mom," he said, his voice shaky. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. Finally, she shook her head, her face a mix of worry and something else. Something like pride. She grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around him, pulling him close. "You're gonna catch your death out there, boy," she muttered, her voice thick. "I'm fine," Derek said, though his teeth were still chattering. He hugged the blanket tighter around himself, feeling his mom's arms around him. He was cold, sure, but somehow he felt a little warmer inside. The next morning, Derek woke up with a sore throat. His room was cold. The blanket his mom wrapped around him had slipped off during the night, leaving his thin bedsheet as his only cover. He rubbed his eyes, feeling his skin prickle with the chill of the early morning air. He shivered, rolling out of bed, his breath visible as a faint cloud in the cold room. The apartment wasn't warm enough, and without his jacket, the cold seemed even sharper. Derek slipped his feet into his worn sneakers and shuffled out of his room. His mom was in the small kitchen, already awake, her back turned to him as she fried something in a pan. The smell of eggs filled the apartment, but even that warmth wasn't enough to make the chill go away. "Morning, Mom," Derek said, his voice hoarse. She turned, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. "You sound terrible," she said. She reached over to the counter, picking up a cup of hot tea and handed it to him. "Here, drink this." "Thanks," Derek said, wrapping his fingers around the warm cup. It felt good, the warmth spreading through his palms. He sipped it slowly, trying to let the heat slide down his throat. She turned back to the stove, flipping the eggs in the pan. "I still can't believe you gave away your jacket," she said quietly, her voice a mix of concern and disbelief. Derek took another sip of tea, feeling the warmth slowly spreading through him. He needed it more, he said simply. He didn't want to argue about it, not when his throat was aching and the cold was still deep in his bones. His mom sighed, shaking her head. "I know you got a good heart, Derek, but you got to think of yourself too, all right? It's winter, and you need a jacket." "I know, Mom," he muttered, his eyes on the steam rising from his cup. She slid the eggs onto a plate and set it down in front of him. "Here, eat up. You need to keep your strength up," she said, her hand brushing his hair as she sat down at the small table across from him. Derek picked up a fork, poking at the eggs. He took a small bite, still feeling the cold deep in his body. His mom watched him for a moment, her face still creased with worry. "You heading to school today?" she asked, her voice soft. Derek nodded. "Yeah, I got to. Can't miss math or I'll be lost." All right, just bundle up, okay? I don't want you getting sick. She pushed her chair back, getting up and opening a small closet by the door. She came back with a worn-out hoodie, the fabric thin and frayed around the cuffs. "Take this," she said, handing it to him. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Derek looked at the hoodie, then up at his mom. He gave her a small smile, grateful. "Thanks, Mom." He pulled it over his head, the fabric thin but still a layer between him and the cold outside. She nodded, her eyes softening for a moment. "All right, now hurry up or you'll be late." Derek finished his eggs, grabbed his backpack, and headed out. The cold hit him like a slap as soon as he stepped outside, the wind cutting through the thin hoodie like it was nothing. He hugged himself, trying to keep his body warmth from escaping, and started down the street. The walk to school was long, and every step seemed to drag today. He kept his head down, his hands in his hoodie pocket, his shoulders hunched. People passed by, some bundled in thick coats, scarves wrapped tightly around their necks, others in heavy winter jackets. Derek felt out of place, his hoodie barely enough to keep him from freezing. Halfway to school, he passed by the same alley where he had seen the old man. He glanced over, his eyes searching for the man, but the spot where he had sat was empty. Derek paused, staring at the wall. The memory of the old man's trembling frame flashed through his mind, the way his hands had been shaking as he wrapped Derek's jacket around himself. "Hey!" a voice called out, breaking Derek's thoughts. He turned to see Mike again, bundled in his heavy coat, his hands tucked into thick gloves. Mike walked over looking at Derek's hoodie with a frown. "Man, where's your jacket?" he asked, eyebrows raised. Derek shrugged. "I gave it away," he said, his voice casual. Mike stared at him. "You what?" "There was this old guy. He needed it more," Derek said, looking away, suddenly feeling uncomfortable under Mike's stare. Mike shook his head, blowing out a breath. "You're crazy, you know that?" Derek gave a small smile, shrugging again. "Maybe. But it felt like the right thing to do." Mike sighed, shaking his head. "You're gonna freeze, man. Look, I got an extra scarf." He unwound the scarf from around his neck, holding it out. "Take it. Seriously, you're gonna catch something if you don't." Derek hesitated for a moment, then took the scarf. It was thick, warmer than anything he had. He wrapped it around his neck, the fabric covering his face up to his nose. "Thanks, Mike," he said, his voice muffled by the scarf. Mike nodded, giving him a light punch on the arm. "Just don't do anything that stupid again, all right?" "No promises," Derek said, his eyes crinkling in a small smile. Mike laughed, shaking his head. "You're something else, man." He patted Derek on the shoulder. "All right, let's get to school before we both freeze." They walked together, the cold still biting at Derek, but the scarf made it a little better. He could still feel the wind cutting through his hoodie, but at least his face was a bit warmer now. When they got to school, Mike split off to his class, waving as he headed down the hallway. Derek made his way to his locker, trying to ignore the looks from other students. He knew he looked out of place, the only one without a real winter coat. He grabbed his books and headed to math, slipping into his seat near the back. Class started, but Derek found it hard to focus. His mind kept drifting back to the old man. He wondered if the man had found somewhere warm to sleep. He hoped so. He also thought about what his mom had said, about needing to take care of himself. Maybe she was right, but still, how could he just walk away? The bell rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He packed his books and headed to his next class, the day dragging on. By lunchtime, he was exhausted. The cold had taken more out of him than he'd realized, and his throat still hurt. He sat down at a table in the cafeteria, pulling out the small sandwich his mom had packed for him. "Hey, Derek," a girl's voice called. He looked up to see Lisa, a girl from his history class, walking over. She had her lunch tray in one hand, a concerned look on her face. "Mind if I sit?" Yeah, sure, Derek said, moving his bag so she could sit down. Lisa sat, her eyes on his hoodie. You look freezing. Where's your coat? Derek sighed, giving a small shrug. I gave it to someone. They needed it more. Lisa blinked, her eyes widening. You gave away your coat in this weather? Yeah, Derek said, looking down at his sandwich, feeling a little embarrassed. It just felt like the right thing to do. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, shaking her head. That's really kind of you, Derek. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Thanks, he said, his voice soft. She nodded. But you need to stay warm too, you know. You're going to get sick like this. I know, Derek said. I'm working on it. She reached into her bag, pulling out a pair of gloves. Here, take these. They're my brother's, but he never uses them. You need them more. Derek hesitated, then took the gloves, slipping them on. They were a bit big, but they were warm. Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it. She smiled. No problem. Just try to stay warm, okay? I will, Derek said, giving her a small nod. They ate in silence after that, the warmth of the gloves and scarf helping, but still, the cold was there, deep in his bones. The day seemed to drag on forever, and by the time the final bell rang, Derek was ready to head home. He made his way out of the school, the wind biting at his face again, even through the scarf. He started the long walk home, his mind on the warmth of his apartment, on the tea his mom always made for him. The thought made him smile, and he quickened his pace, eager to get out of the cold. Derek reached his apartment building just as the last bit of sunlight faded from the sky. The cold had numbed his face, and his fingers were stiff even with the gloves. He was grateful to be home. The thought of the warm air inside kept him going, step by step, until he was at his door, knocking softly. His mom opened the door, her eyes widening as she saw him. Derek, you look frozen. Get in here, boy. She pulled him inside quickly, her face scrunched in concern. Derek stepped in, taking off the scarf and gloves, feeling the warmth of the small apartment wash over him like a blanket. I'm all right, Mom, he said, trying to sound casual, but his teeth were still chattering slightly. She gave him a look that said she didn't quite believe him. Sit down. I'll get you some hot tea. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Derek heard the clattering of cups and the whistle of the kettle. He sighed, rubbing his hands together, trying to get some feeling back in his fingers. He looked around the apartment, the worn couch, the TV with the cracked screen, the small table in the corner with some bills piled on it. Everything was exactly how it always was, but somehow it felt different. Maybe it was him. Maybe he was the one who felt different, lighter, even though his body was cold. His mom returned, a steaming cup in her hand. Here, drink this, she said, handing it to him. You need to warm up. Derek took the cup gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. He took a sip, the hot liquid burning his throat in the best way. Thanks, Mom, he said quietly. She sat down next to him, her eyes on his face. You look tired, she said softly. This whole jacket thing, it's worrying me, Derek. I know, Mom, he said, looking down at his tea. I couldn't walk away. He needed it. She sighed, shaking her head. I get that, baby. You've got a good heart, and I love that about you. But I don't want you getting sick. We don't have the money for doctors, you know that. I know. Derek nodded, taking another sip of his tea. He didn't want to worry her any more than she already was. He knew how hard she worked, how she pulled double shifts just to keep the lights on and food on the table. He didn't want to add to her burden. His mom reached out, brushing a hand over his hair. You're a good boy, Derek. I just wish the world wasn't so hard on you. Derek swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. It'll get better, Mom, he said, trying to sound hopeful, even if he wasn't sure how. She gave him a small, sad smile. I hope so, baby. After finishing his tea, Derek helped his mom with the dishes, trying to ignore the chill that still hadn't left his bones. The warmth of the apartment helped, but it wasn't enough to fully shake off the cold that had settled in. When they finished cleaning up, his mom pulled out an extra blanket from the closet and handed it to him. "Here, put this on your bed. It's going to be a cold one tonight," she said. "Thanks, Mom." Derek took the blanket and headed to his room, spreading it over his bed. He sat down, pulling the blanket around himself, trying to get comfortable. His body ached from the cold, and his throat still hurt, but he closed his eyes, trying to relax. He thought of the old man again, the way his eyes had filled with tears when Derek gave him his jacket. It had been worth it, even if it meant he was freezing now. That look on the man's face, the gratitude, it had made everything worth it. The night passed slowly. Derek tossed and turned, the cold making it hard to sleep. He kept the blanket wrapped tightly around himself, but it wasn't the same as having a proper jacket. He could hear the wind outside, the way it howled against the windows, and he wondered if the old man was all right. He hoped he had found a warm place to sleep. When morning finally came, Derek felt groggy. His throat was still sore, and his body ached all over. He forced himself out of bed, rubbing his eyes. His mom was already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of toast filled the apartment, and it made Derek's stomach growl. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned, giving him a worried look. "You don't sound too good, baby. Maybe you should stay home today." Derek shook his head. "I'm fine. I got math today. Can't miss it." She frowned but nodded. "All right. But you take it easy, you hear me?" "Yeah, I will," he said, forcing a small smile. She handed him a piece of toast and a small cup of tea. "Here, eat something before you go." Derek took the toast, eating it slowly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a little energy. He drank the tea, the warmth helping soothe his sore throat. He put on the hoodie his mom had given him, wrapping the scarf from Mike around his neck again. "Be careful out there, okay?" his mom said as he headed for the door. "I will, Mom. Don't worry," he said, giving her a quick hug before stepping outside. The cold hit him immediately and he shivered, hugging the hoodie tighter around himself. He started down the street, his breath visible in the freezing air. The walk to school seemed even longer today. His legs felt heavy, and his head was pounding. As he walked, he passed by the alley again. He glanced over, his eyes scanning for any sign of the old man. For a moment he thought he saw movement, a shadow shifting near the wall. He stopped, squinting through the dim morning light. "Hey!" Derek called out, his voice barely above a whisper. He took a few steps closer, his shoes crunching on the frost-covered ground. The old man was there, huddled under Derek's jacket, his eyes half closed. He looked up as Derek approached, his face lighting up with recognition. "You," he said, his voice weak, but there was a smile there. "Yeah, it's me," Derek said, kneeling down. You okay?" The old man nodded slowly. "Better, thanks to you, boy," he said, his voice trembling. Derek smiled, though his heart ached seeing the man like this. He was glad to see he was still alive, but it was clear the cold was taking its toll. "You need anything?" he asked, his eyes searching the man's face. The old man shook his head, his eyes soft. "No, son. You've done enough. More than anyone else ever would." Derek bit his lip, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. He didn't know what else to say. He wanted to help more, but he had nothing left to give. He reached out, touching the old man's shoulder gently. "I wish I could do more," he whispered. The old man smiled, his eyes glassy. "You've given me hope, boy. That's more than I could ask for." Derek swallowed hard, nodding. He stood up, his legs feeling weak. "Take care of yourself, all right?" he said, his voice thick. The old man nodded again, his eyes closing as he leaned back against the wall. "You too, son." Derek turned, heading back to the main street, his heart heavy. He felt the cold biting at his skin, but he kept walking, trying to focus on getting to school. His mind was racing, thoughts of the old man, his mom, the cold. Everything seemed to blur together, and he felt overwhelmed. By the time he got to school, he was exhausted. His head was pounding and his body ached. He slipped into his first class, sitting down at his desk, trying to focus on the teacher's voice. But his mind kept drifting back to the alley, to the old man huddled under his jacket. He hoped the man would make it, hoped that somehow things would get better for him. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Derek barely heard anything his teachers said. He was too tired, too cold, and too worried to focus. When the final bell rang, he grabbed his backpack, heading out of the building without saying a word to anyone. He started the long walk home, his legs feeling like they could give out at any moment. The wind was brutal, and he could feel his body shivering, the cold sinking deep into his bones. He wrapped the scarf tighter around his neck, trying to keep himself warm. As he rounded the corner to his street, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. Parked in front of his apartment building was a large, black limousine. Derek blinked, his heart pounding as he stared at the car. He'd never seen anything like it before, not in his neighborhood. He took a deep breath, walking slowly towards his building, his eyes on the limo. The door opened and a man in a suit stepped out, looking around. When he saw Derek, his eyes lit up, and he smiled. "You must be Derek," the man said, his voice warm. Derek frowned, confused. "Yeah, who are you?" The man took a step forward, his smile widening. "I'm here on behalf of someone you helped recently. He wanted me to thank you personally." Derek's heart skipped a beat, his eyes widening. "You mean the old man?" The man nodded. "Yes, and he has something for you." Derek stared at the man, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt his mouth go dry, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what to say. The cold that had been eating away at his bones seemed to disappear, replaced by a rush of confusion and disbelief. You're here because of the old man?" Derek managed to say, his voice almost a whisper. The man in the suit smiled, nodding. "That's right. He told me about what you did for him, how you gave him your only jacket in the freezing cold." The man paused, his eyes softening. He was deeply moved, Derek. He wanted to make sure you knew how much it meant to him. Derek blinked, trying to wrap his head around what was happening. Is he okay?" he asked, his voice shaky. He couldn't shake the image of the old man huddled in the alley, the way he had looked so fragile and cold. The man nodded, his smile still there. "He's okay now. He's in a much warmer place thanks to you." The man gestured towards the limousine. "In fact, he asked me to bring you something." Derek felt his heart skip again, his eyes shifting to the limo. He wasn't sure what to expect. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was standing right next to the man in the suit. The man opened the door of the limo, and Derek looked inside. His eyes widened as he saw a box, neatly placed on the back seat, wrapped in dark blue paper. The man reached in and picked it up, turning back to Derek and holding it out to him. "What's this?" Derek asked, staring at the box. "It's a gift," the man said simply. "From someone who understands how hard it can be to make a selfless decision. Go on, open it." Derek took the box, his hands trembling slightly. The paper was soft, and he carefully pulled at the edge, peeling it back until the box underneath was revealed. He opened the lid, his eyes widening at what he saw inside. A brand new, thick winter jacket. The material looked warm, heavy, and high quality, something that Derek could never have afforded in a million years. He swallowed, his throat tight as he looked at it, then up at the man in the suit. This is for me?" he asked, barely able to get the words out. The man nodded, his eyes warm. Yes, he wanted to make sure you were taken care of after what you did for him. Derek felt his eyes sting, and he quickly blinked back the tears that threatened to fall. He pulled the jacket out of the box, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It was soft, thick, and the lining inside felt warm and comfortable. He could already tell it was better than any jacket he had ever owned. "Thank you," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. He slipped the jacket on, feeling the warmth wrap around him like a hug. It fit perfectly, and for the first time in days, he felt truly warm. The man smiled, nodding. "You deserve it, Derek. What you did. Not many people would have done that. You showed a kindness that is rare, and he wanted to make sure you knew it didn't go unnoticed." Derek looked down at the jacket, his fingers brushing over the material. It was almost too much to take in. He had given away his only jacket because he couldn't stand to see someone else suffer, and now, here he was, standing in front of his apartment building, wearing a jacket that felt like it was made just for him. Tell him thank you," Derek said, looking up at the man, his eyes still glassy. "And that I'm glad he's okay." The man nodded, his smile softening. "I will. And Derek, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. You've got friends now, people who care." Derek felt a lump form in his throat, and he nodded. "Thanks. I mean it." The man gave him a final nod, then stepped back towards the limo. He opened the door, slipping inside, and with a wave, the limo pulled away from the curb, disappearing down the street. Derek stood there for a moment, watching until the car was out of sight. He took a deep breath, then turned and walked up the stairs to his apartment. He could already feel the difference the new jacket made, the way it kept the cold from seeping into his bones. It was like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, his mom opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw the new jacket. "Derek, what is this?" she asked, her voice filled with shock. "It's a gift, Mom," Derek said, stepping inside, the warmth of the apartment enveloping him. "From the man I gave my jacket to. He wanted to thank me." His mom stared at him, her mouth open in disbelief. She reached out, her hand touching the material of the jacket. It's so nice, Derek. It must have cost a fortune." "I know," Derek said, smiling a little. "But he said I deserved it." She looked up at him, her eyes softening, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she pulled him into a tight hug, her arms wrapping around him. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered, her voice thick. "So proud." Derek hugged her back, closing his eyes. "Thanks, Mom." She pulled back, brushing a tear from her cheek. "All right, sit down. I'm going to make us something hot to drink, okay?" Derek nodded, taking off the jacket and hanging it carefully on the back of a chair. He sat down at the table, watching as his mom moved around the kitchen, her hands quick and practiced. He could see the relief in her shoulders, the way they seemed to relax now that he had something warm to wear. "Hey, Mom," Derek said, his voice soft. She turned, looking at him. "Yeah, baby?" He hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Do you think things are finally looking up for us?" She paused, then gave him a small smile, nodding. "Yeah, Derek. I think they just might be." They spent the rest of the evening together, drinking hot tea and talking about small things, school, work, what they might cook for dinner the next day. It was simple, but it felt like more than that. It felt like a turning point, like maybe things could actually get better. That night, as Derek lay in bed, wrapped in the extra blanket his mom had given him, he felt different. The cold was still there, the wind still howling outside, but he felt a warmth deep in his chest. The new jacket hung in the corner, and every time he looked at it, it reminded him that there was good in the world, even in the most unexpected places. The next morning, Derek woke up feeling better. The sore throat was still there, but it wasn't as bad as before. He got up, pulled on his new jacket, and headed out the door. His mom gave him a quick hug before he left, her eyes still shining with pride. The air outside was cold, but the jacket made all the difference. It was like a shield, keeping the wind away from his body, and for the first time in days, Derek walked to school without shivering. As he passed by the alley, he looked over, but the old man wasn't there. Derek paused, staring at the empty space where the man had been. He hoped he was somewhere warm, somewhere safe. He took a deep breath, then kept walking, a small smile on his face. When he got to school, people noticed the jacket immediately. Mike was the first to see him, his eyes widening as he walked over. "Yo, Derek, where'd you get that?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. Derek grinned, shrugging. "It's a long story, let's just say. Someone wanted to thank me." Mike raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. "Man, you're something else, you know that?" Derek laughed, shaking his head. "I guess." As the day went on, people kept asking him about the jacket, and every time Derek just smiled and said it was a gift. He didn't want to get into the details. It was something special, something between him and the old man. By the time school let out, Derek felt lighter. The cold didn't bother him. The weight of everything seemed to have lifted, even if just a little. He started his walk home, his hands in his pockets, his head held high. When he got to his street, he saw his mom standing outside their building, talking to someone. As he got closer, he realized it was the same man in the suit from before. The limo was parked by the curb, and the man was smiling, his hands in his pockets. Derek's mom turned, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Derek, come here," she called, waving him over. He walked up, his heart pounding. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between his mom and the man. The man smiled, nodding at him. "Derek, we have another surprise for you. And this one might just change everything." Derek blinked at the man, his heart racing with both excitement and confusion. His mom looked just as bewildered as she smiled nervously at him. The suited man gestured towards the black limousine parked by the curb, its sleek exterior glistening under the fading winter sun. "Another surprise?" Derek managed, his voice cracking slightly. He looked at his mom, but she simply shrugged, her face filled with curiosity. The man smiled, nodding. "Why don't you both come with me? It's something best seen in person." Derek exchanged a look with his mom, who hesitated. She rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them up, and finally said, "Well, if it's really safe, let's at least hear what he has to say." She nodded at Derek. He could see that she was as eager to understand what was going on as he was. The man stepped aside, opening the door of the limo, and gestured for them to get in. "It's completely safe, I assure you. This will be worth your time." Derek nodded, swallowing his nerves. He trusted that if this was about the old man, it had to be something good. He climbed in, followed by his mom. The interior of the limousine was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Plush leather seats, a small screen, and soft lighting made the whole vehicle feel like it was from another world. The man closed the door behind them and walked around to the driver's side. He got in, and soon they were moving, pulling away from the curb with a smoothness that made Derek's head spin a bit. "Where are we going?" Derek asked, his voice shaky with excitement and just a bit of fear. The man turned his head slightly. "You'll see. It's not too far, just sit back and enjoy the ride." Derek leaned back, looking at his mom. She looked just as overwhelmed, her hands resting tensely on her lap. "What do you think this is?" she whispered. Derek shook his head. "I don't know, Mom. But I think it has to do with that old guy, the one I helped. He seemed really grateful." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with both concern and a hint of hope. "I guess we'll just have to see." They drove for about 15 minutes, the limousine moving effortlessly through the narrow streets of Detroit. Derek watched out the window, the buildings blurring by, the sky darkening as evening settled in. He was trying to piece everything together, but nothing made sense yet. Finally, the limo slowed down, and the driver turned into a narrow street. Derek could see a building up ahead, an old 3-story brick building with a sign above the door that read, Community Outreach Center. The car came to a stop, and the man stepped out, walking around to open the door for them. "Here we are," he said, smiling as Derek and his mom climbed out. Derek looked up at the building, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this place?" Derek asked. The man gestured towards the building. "This is a community center that has been struggling to stay afloat for years now. The gentleman you helped, well, he has a particular interest in helping places like this. He thought maybe you'd like to see the difference a simple act of kindness can make." Derek felt his heart skip. He turned to his mom, who looked just as puzzled but also touched by the gesture. "A community center?" she whispered. The man nodded, and as if on cue, the door of the building opened, and a woman stepped out, her smile warm and welcoming. She wore a thick sweater and gloves, her face rosy from the cold. She waved to them, walking over quickly. "Welcome. You must be Derek," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Ms. Thompson, the coordinator here. We've been expecting you." Derek shook her hand, glancing at his mom. "Expecting us? I didn't know." Ms. Thompson chuckled. "Well, let's just say your friend told us a lot about you. He wanted us to make sure you and your mom knew how much your kindness has inspired others." Derek blinked, trying to absorb everything. "But why are we here?" The woman smiled, gesturing for them to follow her. "Come inside. I'll explain everything." They followed her into the building. The warmth inside was immediate, and Derek sighed in relief, rubbing his hands together. The hallway was decorated with drawings and posters, all bright colors and hopeful messages. They walked into a large room that looked like a common area, couches, tables, bookshelves, and a couple of kids playing near the back. "This center is for families who need a little extra help," Ms. Thompson said, looking around the room. "We offer after-school programs, meals, and a safe space for kids. But we've been struggling for a while now. We didn't have enough funding to keep things running properly." She turned to look at Derek, her eyes softening. "But thanks to your friend, and because of your kindness, we received a very generous donation, enough to keep this place running for a long time." Derek's eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly. Because I gave him my jacket?" Ms. Thompson nodded. "That's right. He told us how moved he was by what you did, and he wanted to pay it forward in a big way." Derek looked at his mom, who had her hand over her mouth, her eyes shining with emotion. She shook her head, smiling through the tears that had begun to form. I can't believe this," she whispered. Ms. Thompson smiled, reaching out to pat Derek's shoulder. "You've inspired a lot of people, Derek. More than you know." Derek swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. He looked around the room again, at the kids playing, at the bright posters on the wall, and it finally began to sink in. His one small act, giving away his only jacket, had led to all of this. The man in the suit stepped forward, his hands in his pockets. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice gentle. He pulled a small envelope from his coat and handed it to Derek's mom. "For you. A little something to help you and Derek out." She took the envelope, her hands trembling as she opened it. Her eyes widened, and she looked at Derek, then back at the man. This is too much," she stammered. Derek peeked over her shoulder and saw several $100 bills inside. His heart skipped, his eyes widening. He looked at the man, who smiled softly. "It's not too much," the man said. "It's just enough to make sure you two have a little less to worry about. Consider it a thank you from all of us." Tears spilled down his mom's cheeks, and she reached out, hugging the man tightly. He looked slightly startled but patted her back gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Derek watched, his chest swelling with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite name. Relief, happiness, hope, all of it tangled together. He felt his eyes sting, and he quickly wiped at them, trying to keep the tears back. After a moment, his mom stepped back, her face flushed with emotion. She looked at Derek, her eyes shining. "See, baby? I told you things would get better," she whispered. Derek nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He just smiled, a real, genuine smile that felt like it came from deep inside. Ms. Thompson clapped her hands, her smile wide. "All right. How about we show you around? There's a lot more to see, and I think you'll like what we're doing here." Derek nodded, following her as she led them through the center. She showed them the classrooms, the small kitchen where they prepared meals, and a cozy reading room filled with books. Everywhere they went, Derek could see the difference this place made for the kids who came here. He could see it in their faces, in the smiles and the laughter that echoed through the halls. As they finished the tour, Ms. Thompson stopped in front of a wall covered in drawings. She pointed to one, a crayon drawing of a boy giving a jacket to an old man. The words, "Kindness changes everything," were written underneath in shaky, colorful letters. Derek stared at the drawing, his eyes blurring as he realized what it was. He felt his mom's hand on his shoulder, her grip gentle and comforting. "That's you, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice full of pride. Derek nodded, his eyes fixed on the drawing. He took a deep breath, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Yeah," he whispered. "That's me." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They stayed for a while longer, talking with Ms. Thompson and the man in the suit, learning more about the center and all the people it helped. By the time they finally left, the sky was dark, and the air outside was frigid. But for once, Derek barely felt it. He had his new jacket, thick and warm, and his mom walking beside him, her face filled with hope. He felt lighter than he had in a long time, like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. As they walked back home, his mom looked over at him, her eyes soft. "You know, Derek," she said, her voice gentle, "I think this is just the beginning. I think there are a lot of good things ahead for us." Derek smiled, nodding. "Yeah, Mom. I think so too." They walked the rest of the way in silence, the cold Detroit night wrapped around them, but the warmth of hope filling their hearts. The next morning, Derek woke up earlier than usual. His alarm hadn't even gone off yet, but his mind was already buzzing with everything that had happened the day before. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. The community center, the donation, the new jacket. It all felt like a dream. A good dream, but one he was still trying to wrap his head around. His mom was already awake when he finally got out of bed. He could hear her in the kitchen, humming softly as she moved around, the sound of pots and pans clinking. It was a comforting sound, and it made Derek smile. He pulled on his new jacket, feeling the warmth of it as he zipped it up, then headed out to join her. "Morning, Mom," Derek said, his voice still rough from sleep. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the drowsiness. She turned, smiling at him. "Morning, baby. You're up early today." She pointed to a small bowl of oatmeal she had set on the table. "I made you some breakfast. You need to keep your energy up." Derek smiled, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Thanks, Mom. I feel, I don't know, like I could do anything today." She laughed, shaking her head. "Well, that's good to hear. It's a new day, Derek, a fresh start for both of us." She sat down across from him, her eyes softening. "I just want you to know how proud I am of you. What you did, giving that man your jacket, it shows just how good your heart is. Not many people would do that." Derek felt his face flush, and he looked down at his oatmeal, stirring it with his spoon. I couldn't just walk away, you know? She reached across the table, placing her hand on his. I know, baby. And that's what makes you special. After breakfast, Derek packed up his backpack, double-checked his homework, and said goodbye to his mom. The air outside was sharp, but the jacket kept him warm, the cold barely brushing against him as he started the walk to school. It was a long walk, like always, but today it felt different. He felt like he was floating, like everything that had weighed him down for so long had finally started to lift. The first thing Derek noticed when he got to school was the way people were looking at him. He couldn't quite figure out what it was at first. There was something different in their faces, something softer. He walked to his locker, keeping his head down, trying not to draw too much attention to himself. "Derek," a voice called out, and he turned to see Lisa walking over, her smile wide. She had her hands tucked into her pockets, her face bright despite the cold. "Hey, Lisa," Derek said, smiling back. He leaned against his locker, trying to play it cool. "What's up?" She stopped in front of him, her eyes scanning his face. "I heard about what happened, with the old man and the community center. It's all over the school." Derek blinked, feeling his stomach flip. "Wait, what?" Lisa nodded, her smile widening. "Yeah, someone posted about it online last night, and now everyone knows. They're saying you're like a hero or something." Derek could feel his face flushing, and he shook his head quickly. "I'm not a hero, Lisa. I gave someone my jacket. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," Lisa insisted. She reached out, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "You made a difference, Derek. You inspired people. That's pretty amazing if you ask me." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Mike came walking up, his grin wide as he clapped Derek on the back. "Yo, hero, you gonna sign autographs or what?" he said, laughing. "Cut it out, Mike," Derek said, shaking his head. He tried to hide the smile tugging at his lips, but it was hard. The energy around him felt so different. People were smiling at him, nodding as they walked by, and for once, he didn't feel invisible. "All jokes aside, man," Mike said, his voice turning serious, "what you did was incredible. You got people talking. Makes the rest of us think we could be doing more, you know?" Derek shrugged, his shoulders feeling a little lighter. I just did what I thought was right. And that's why you're the man," Mike said, nodding approvingly. He slapped Derek on the shoulder again. "All right, I'm gonna head to class. Don't let all this fame go to your head, all right?" Derek rolled his eyes, laughing. Yeah, I'll keep my feet on the ground." As Mike walked away, Lisa stayed behind, her eyes still on Derek. "Seriously, though," she said softly, "people look up to you now. I look up to you." Derek felt his chest tighten, his heart pounding. He looked down, trying to hide the blush that crept up his neck. "Thanks, Lisa. That means a lot." She smiled, her eyes kind. "All right, I'll see you in class. Just remember, you're not just anyone, Derek. You're something special." He watched as she walked away, her words echoing in his mind. He took a deep breath, turning back to his locker and grabbing his books. Everything felt different now, but in the best possible way. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, like maybe he really could make a difference. The day went by quickly, the usual rhythm of classes and bells feeling less heavy, less exhausting. During lunch, Derek sat with Mike and a few other kids, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was just trying to blend in. He felt like he was part of something, like maybe people actually saw him for who he was. By the time the final bell rang, Derek was in high spirits. He walked out of the school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, and started the walk home. The air was still cold, but the jacket kept him warm, the soft lining comforting against his skin. He could see his breath in front of him, little clouds of fog as he walked, his footsteps echoing on the empty street. As he rounded the corner to his street, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. There, parked right in front of his apartment building, was the black limousine. Derek felt his heart skip a beat, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling in his chest. He took a deep breath, walking slowly towards the building, his eyes fixed on the limo. The door of the limousine opened, and the man in the suit stepped out, his smile warm as he saw Derek approaching. "Derek, good to see you again," he called out, his voice carrying across the cold air. Derek walked up, his eyebrows furrowing. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. The man smiled, his eyes glinting. "There's someone here who'd like to see you. Someone who wants to thank you properly for everything you've done." Derek blinked, his stomach flipping. "Who?" The man stepped aside, and from inside the limo, the old man stepped out. He was dressed in clean, warm clothes, his face freshly shaven, and his eyes bright with emotion. He looked at Derek, his lips curling into a soft smile. "Hello, Derek," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Derek felt his eyes widen, his breath catching in his throat. You're here?" He couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The last time he had seen the old man, he had looked so frail, so lost. Now he looked like a completely different person. The old man nodded, his eyes glistening. "I wanted to see you again, to thank you, face to face, for what you did for me. You saved my life, son." Derek swallowed, his throat tight. He could barely find the words. I gave you my jacket. That's all." The old man shook his head, stepping closer. "No, son. You gave me hope. You reminded me that there are good people in this world. And because of you, I found a way to get back on my feet." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wrapped box. He held it out to Derek, his hands trembling. "This is for you. A small token of my gratitude." Derek stared at the box, his heart pounding. He reached out, taking it carefully. The paper was soft beneath his fingers, and he slowly unwrapped it, his hands shaking. Inside was a watch, simple, elegant, the kind of watch that people like him only ever saw in magazines. "It belonged to my father," the old man said, his voice soft. "He always told me that time was the most precious gift we have, and I want you to have this as a reminder of the difference you made in my life." Derek looked at the watch, his vision blurring as tears filled his eyes. He swallowed, looking up at the old man. "I don't know what to say. This is too much." The old man smiled, his eyes gentle. "It's not too much, son, it's just enough. You've given me more than I could ever repay, and I want you to know that you have a friend for life." Derek nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He slipped the watch onto his wrist, the weight of it comforting, solid. He looked at the old man, his heart swelling with gratitude and something else, something like hope. "Thank you," Derek whispered, his voice barely audible. The old man reached out, pulling Derek into a gentle hug. "No, son. Thank you." They stood there for a moment, the cold air wrapping around them, but Derek barely felt it. All he felt was the warmth of the old man's embrace, the kindness that had brought them together, and the sense that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. As they pulled away, the old man smiled, nodding towards the building. "Now let's go inside. It's too cold out here, and I think your mom would like to see us both." Derek nodded, his smile widening. "Yeah, let's go." Together they walked into the building, the old man at his side, and for the first time in a long time, Derek felt like everything was falling into place. The warmth of the apartment embraced Derek and the old man as they stepped inside. Derek's mom stood in the kitchen, her back turned to them as she worked on dinner. She turned around at the sound of the door opening, her eyes widening when she saw Derek, and then even more when she recognized the old man beside him. "Derek," she said, her voice filled with surprise. "Is that—" Derek nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, Mom, it's him. He wanted to come by to thank us." The old man took a step forward, his eyes warm and filled with gratitude. "Hello, ma'am. I hope it's all right that I'm here. I wanted to express my thanks in person for everything your son did for me." Derek's mom wiped her hands on a dish towel, her eyes misting over as she looked at the old man. She walked over, extending her hand, her voice trembling. "You're always welcome here. I'm glad you're doing okay." When Derek told me what happened, I couldn't stop worrying. The old man took her hand, shaking it gently. "Your boy is something special. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for him." She smiled, her eyes filled with pride as she glanced at Derek. "I know. He's always been that way, always looking out for others." Derek felt his face flush and he looked away, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Come on, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No, Derek," the old man said, his voice gentle. "Not just anyone would do what you did. Most people would have walked right by. But you didn't." Derek swallowed, nodding. He could feel the weight of their words, and for the first time, it didn't make him uncomfortable. It made him feel proud. "Can I offer you something to eat?" his mom asked, gesturing to the small table in the corner of the kitchen. "I'm making some stew. It's not much, but you're welcome to join us." The old man smiled, nodding. "I'd love that. Thank you." They sat down together at the table, Derek's mom moving around the kitchen, ladling stew into 3 bowls. The rich, savory smell filled the small space, and Derek's stomach growled in response. It had been a long day, and he realized just how hungry he was. "So," Derek's mom said as she set the bowls down in front of them, "what brings you here today?" The old man looked at her, then at Derek, his eyes softening. "I wanted to thank you both, and I wanted to tell you that things are looking up for me now. Thanks to your son, I've found a way to get back on my feet, and I wanted to share some good news." Derek looked up, his spoon pausing halfway to his mouth. "Good news?" he asked, his voice curious. The old man nodded, his eyes bright. "I've been in touch with some old friends of mine, people I lost contact with when I fell on hard times. They've helped me get a place to stay, and they've offered me a job. I'm finally getting back on track, and I couldn't have done it without you." Derek felt his heart swell, a smile spreading across his face. "That's amazing," he said, his voice filled with genuine happiness. "I'm so glad to hear that." The old man nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "And I wanted to tell you something else. I've talked with my friends, and we want to help others the way you helped me. We're going to start a program at the community center, one that'll help people who are struggling to get back on their feet. People like me who just need a little bit of kindness to find their way again." Derek's mom gasped, her eyes widening. That's incredible," the old man smiled, looking at Derek. "It's all because of you, son. You inspired me. You reminded me that there are good people in this world, and I want to be one of them. I want to make a difference." Derek felt his throat tighten, and he swallowed hard, his eyes stinging with emotion. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. I'm really glad. I'm glad I could help." The old man reached across the table, placing his hand on Derek's arm. "You did more than help. You changed my life." They ate together, the warmth of the stew and the warmth of their conversation filling the room. It felt like a new beginning, not just for the old man, but for Derek and his mom as well. The weight of their struggles, the constant worry about bills and food, seemed to lift just a little, replaced by the hope that maybe, just maybe, things were finally starting to change for the better. When they finished eating, the old man stood, thanking Derek's mom again for the meal. He turned to Derek, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I want you to come by the community center sometime soon. I'd love for you to see what we're doing there. I think you could be a big part of it if you're interested." Derek's eyes widened, his heart skipping a beat. "Really? You want me to help?" The old man nodded. "Absolutely. You've got a good heart, Derek. We need people like you. People who care." Derek swallowed, nodding. Yeah, I'd love to help. Just tell me when and I'll be there." The old man smiled, reaching out to shake Derek's hand. "I knew I could count on you." "Thank you, son. You've already done so much, and I know this is just the beginning." Derek's mom walked the old man to the door, thanking him again for everything. As the door closed behind him, she turned to Derek, her eyes filled with pride. "See, baby," she said, her voice soft. "Good things happen when you do the right thing. I've always known you were special." Derek smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the jacket or the stew. It was the warmth of knowing that he had made a real difference, that he had helped someone when they needed it most, and that his actions had sparked something bigger than himself. That night, Derek lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. He thought about everything that had happened: the old man, the community center, the way people at school had started to notice him, to look up to him. He thought about the future, about the opportunities that might be waiting for him now, and for the first time in a long time, he felt excited. He felt hopeful. The next day, Derek woke up early again, the sun barely peeking through the curtains of his small room. He dressed quickly, pulling on his new jacket and slipping the watch onto his wrist. The weight of it felt reassuring, like a reminder that time was precious and that he had the power to make it count. His mom was already up as usual, sipping her coffee in the kitchen. She looked up when Derek walked in, her eyes softening as she saw him. "You're up early again," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Derek shrugged, smiling. "Just got a lot to do today, I guess." She nodded, her smile widening. "I'm glad to see you so happy, baby. It makes everything worth it." Derek walked over, giving her a quick hug. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." She patted his back, her voice gentle. "Just keep being you, Derek. That's all I need." He grabbed his backpack, heading out the door with a wave. The air was cold, but the jacket kept him warm, the fabric snug against his skin. He walked with a sense of purpose, his head held high. He wasn't just walking to school today. He was walking towards something more, something bigger. A future that felt open, filled with possibilities. When he got to school, he saw Mike waiting by the entrance, a grin on his face. "Yo, Derek," he called, waving him over. "Hey, Mike," Derek said, smiling. He walked over, his heart feeling lighter. "You coming to the community center later?" Mike asked, his eyes filled with curiosity. "I heard they're starting something new, and I thought maybe you'd want to check it out." Derek nodded, his smile widening. "Yeah, I'm definitely going. I think it's going to be something really great." Mike slapped him on the back, nodding. "Cool. I'll see you there then." As they walked into school together, Derek felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just about school, or work, or even the community center. It was about knowing that he had the power to make a difference, to be part of something that mattered. The day went by quickly, each class blurring into the next. When the final bell rang, Derek grabbed his backpack, heading out the door with Mike by his side. They made their way to the community center, their breath visible in the cold air as they talked and laughed. When they arrived, Ms. Thompson was waiting at the entrance, her smile bright as she waved them inside. "Welcome back, boys," she called, her eyes shining. "We've got a lot of work to do, but I think you're going to love it." Derek stepped inside, the warmth of the community center wrapping around him like a blanket. He looked around at the kids playing, the volunteers moving around, setting up tables and chairs. It felt alive, filled with hope and purpose, and Derek knew that this was where he belonged. Ms. Thompson walked over, handing Derek a clipboard. "Think you're ready to get started?" she asked, her smile wide. Derek nodded, his heart swelling with excitement. "Absolutely," he said, his voice filled with determination. And as he looked around, at the faces of the kids, at the volunteers, at the old man who stood in the corner, watching with a proud smile, Derek knew that this was just the beginning. There was so much more to do, so much more to give, and he was ready for it. He had found his place, his purpose, and he wasn't going to let it go. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The community center had become like a second home for Derek. Every day after school, he found himself heading straight there, eager to help out. The place was always busy, kids laughing and playing, volunteers organizing activities, and the warmth of everyone working together to make something good happen. It filled Derek with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. Ms. Thompson quickly put him to work, handing him tasks that kept him on his feet. He helped organize book drives, set up tables for meals, and played games with the younger kids who came after school. It wasn't long before Derek became a familiar face around the center, someone everyone looked to for help. "Hey, Derek, can you give me a hand over here?" One of the volunteers, Sarah, called out one afternoon as she struggled with a stack of chairs. Derek nodded, jogging over and grabbing half the chairs. "Got it. Where are these going?" Sarah smiled, nodding towards the corner of the room. "Over there. We're setting up for the art class." Derek carried the chairs over, setting them up in a neat row. He could hear the kids talking excitedly, their voices a mix of laughter and chatter. It made him smile, the energy infectious. "Thanks, Derek," Sarah said, giving him a grateful smile. "No problem," Derek said, wiping his hands on his jeans. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the kids, the other volunteers. Everyone seemed happy, focused on making the community center a welcoming place. "Derek," a familiar voice called out, and he turned to see Lisa walking in, her eyes bright. She waved, making her way over to him. "Hey, I thought I might find you here." "Hey, Lisa," Derek said, smiling. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the art class," she said, her eyes flicking to the table covered in art supplies. "I thought I'd come and help out. You know, see if I can make a difference too." Derek nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. "That's awesome. We could definitely use the help." They spent the afternoon working together, helping the kids with their art projects. Lisa had a way with the younger kids. She was patient, her voice always gentle as she encouraged them, praised their work, or helped when they got stuck. Derek found himself watching her, admiring how easily she connected with the kids. By the end of the day, the tables were covered in colorful drawings, some of them messy and wild, others carefully done. The kids were beaming, each one eager to show off their artwork. Derek helped one of the boys, Marcus, hold up his picture, a bright crayon drawing of a superhero. "That's really cool, Marcus," Derek said, smiling. "Is that your superhero?" Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, he's going to save everybody." Derek ruffled Marcus's hair, his smile widening. "I bet he will." When the class ended and the kids started heading home, Derek and Lisa stayed behind to help clean up. They gathered up the markers and paints, stacking them neatly on the shelves. "Hey," Lisa said as they worked, her voice soft. She glanced over at Derek, her eyes thoughtful. "I wanted to tell you something." Derek looked up, meeting her gaze. "Yeah? What's up?" She paused, biting her lip, then smiled. "I think what you're doing here is amazing. You've really made a difference, Derek. Not just for the kids, but for everyone here." Derek felt his face heat up, and he looked down, his fingers fiddling with the cap of a marker. "I don't know, I'm just trying to help out, you know?" Lisa shook her head, stepping closer. "No, it's more than that. You've inspired people. You've inspired me." She hesitated, then added, "I never would have come here if it weren't for you." Derek looked up, his heart skipping a beat. "Really? She nodded, her smile widening. Yeah, you made me realize that we can all do something. Even if it seems small, it still matters. Derek swallowed, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to hearing things like this. It made him feel both proud and a little embarrassed. He nodded, trying to find the right words. Thanks, Lisa, that means a lot. She reached out, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. No need to thank me. Just keep being you, Derek. They finished cleaning up, the room now quiet and empty, the warmth of the day's activities lingering in the air. As they left the center, stepping out into the cold evening air, Derek felt something shift inside him. A sense of belonging, a feeling that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next few weeks at the community center were just as busy. Word started to spread about the programs they were running, and more families began to show up, eager to get involved. Derek could see the impact firsthand. He watched as the kids who came to the center found a place where they could be themselves, where they felt safe and supported. It made everything worth it. One afternoon, Ms. Thompson called Derek over, her eyes bright with excitement. Derek, I've got some great news, she said, handing him a flyer. We've just secured a grant from a local business. They heard about what we're doing here, and they want to support us. Derek looked down at the flyer, his eyes widening as he read the details. A grant? That's huge. Ms. Thompson nodded, her smile wide. It is, and it's all because of you. You were the spark that started all of this, Derek. You made people see what's possible. Derek swallowed, his eyes stinging. He looked up at Ms. Thompson, his voice shaky. I just wanted to help. I didn't think it'd turn into all of this. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze soft. That's the thing about kindness. You never know how far it'll go. But you made a difference, Derek. And now we can keep helping more people. Derek nodded, a smile spreading across his face. He felt a rush of pride, mixed with gratitude. He had never imagined that giving away his old jacket would lead to all of this. New programs, new opportunities, a community coming together to help one another. The community center wasn't just a place to go anymore. It had become a symbol of hope, of what could happen when people cared for each other. Derek could see it in the faces of the kids, in the laughter that filled the rooms, in the way people came together to support each other. It was something bigger than any one person, and it made him realize that he was part of something special. One day, after helping serve lunch to the kids, Derek was approached by a man in his late 30s. He was tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. You're Derek, right? He asked, extending his hand. Derek nodded, shaking his hand. Yeah, that's me. The man smiled. I'm James. I've heard a lot about you. My son comes here every day. He's always talking about how much fun he has and how you help everyone out. I just wanted to say thank you. Derek blinked, his chest tightening. Oh, thanks. I'm just happy to help out. James nodded, his eyes softening. I know you are. But what you're doing means the world to these kids. It means a lot to us parents, too. You've given them a safe place, a place where they can be happy. That's more than most people ever do. Derek felt his throat tighten, and he swallowed hard. He wasn't used to hearing this kind of praise. It felt almost overwhelming. But it also made him realize just how much of an impact he was having, and how important the work they were doing at the community center really was. Thanks, James, Derek said, his voice quiet. That means a lot to me. James smiled, giving Derek a pat on the shoulder before walking away. Derek watched him go, his heart swelling with emotion. He felt a sense of pride that he couldn't quite put into words. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Later that evening, as Derek was getting ready to leave the center, the old man, now a regular presence at the community center, helping out wherever he could, walked over to him. He looked at Derek, his eyes filled with warmth. "Derek," he said, his voice gentle, "I just want you to know that you've made all the difference here. You've helped change lives, including mine." Derek looked at the old man, his eyes misting over. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said, his voice cracking. "You're the one who made it all happen." The old man smiled, shaking his head. "No, son. You're the one who inspired me. You showed me what true kindness looks like. And now, we're all here, making a difference together. That's what it's all about." Derek swallowed hard, nodding. He reached out, pulling the old man into a hug, his heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The old man patted his back, his voice soft. "No, son. Thank you." As they pulled away, Derek looked around the community center, at the kids playing, at the volunteers chatting, at the warmth and laughter that filled the space. It felt like home. It felt like hope. And for the first time in his life, Derek felt like he was truly part of something that mattered. As he left the community center that night, walking home with his hands in his pockets, Derek felt the weight of everything. The past, the struggles, the cold winter days, lift from his shoulders. He felt lighter, like he was walking towards something better, and he knew that whatever the future held, he was ready for it. Because kindness changes everything. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Derek's small room, warming the walls and filling the space with light. He blinked awake, rubbing his eyes, and turned over to look at the watch resting on his bedside table. It was still early, but today felt different. Today was important. Another day filled with possibilities. Derek dressed quickly, pulling on his warm jacket and slipping the watch onto his wrist. It felt comfortable there now, like a part of him. The weight of it reminded him of how far he'd come and how much had changed since that cold day on Main Street. He took a deep breath, smiling to himself, and headed out into the kitchen. His mom was there, sipping her coffee, her eyes bright as she looked up at him. "Morning, baby," she said, her voice soft. "You're up early again." Derek nodded, pouring himself a small glass of juice. "Yeah, I've got a lot to do today. I'm heading to the community center after school. They've got the new program starting today." His mom smiled, her pride evident in her eyes. "You've been working so hard there, Derek. I'm so proud of everything you've done." Derek felt a warmth spread through him. "Thanks, Mom. I want to make a difference, you know?" She nodded, reaching over to pat his hand. "And you are, baby. You already have." They ate breakfast together, talking about small things, school, her work, what they might cook for dinner that night. It was simple, but it felt different now. The weight of worry wasn't as heavy. The constant stress of making ends meet wasn't looming over them like it used to. They had enough. And more importantly, they had hope. After breakfast, Derek grabbed his backpack, giving his mom a quick hug before heading out the door. The air outside was brisk, the cold biting at his cheeks. But the jacket kept him warm. He walked to school, his head held high, the watch on his wrist ticking steadily. It was a reminder that time was precious, that every day was a chance to do something that mattered. School passed quickly, the day slipping by in a blur of classes and assignments. During lunch, Derek sat with Lisa and Mike, the three of them laughing and talking about the upcoming events at the community center. "You coming by later, Lisa?" Derek asked, looking across the table at her. Lisa nodded, her smile bright. "Yeah, I wouldn't miss it. I heard they're starting the new mentorship program today. I want to see how it goes." Mike grinned, nudging Derek's arm. "You're like the big boss over there now, aren't you?" Derek rolled his eyes, laughing. "Nah, I'm just helping out where I can." "Well, you're doing a good job of it," Lisa said, her voice warm. "You've made a difference, Derek. We all see it." Derek felt his cheeks heat up, and he looked down at his tray, smiling. "Thanks, Lisa. That means a lot." The final bell rang, and Derek grabbed his backpack, heading out of the school with Mike and Lisa by his side. They walked together towards the community center, their breath visible in the cold air, their laughter echoing down the street. When they arrived, the community center was already bustling with activity. Kids were playing in the common area, volunteers were setting up tables, and Ms. Thompson was at the front desk, her face lighting up when she saw Derek and his friends walk in. "Derek, Lisa, Mike, so glad you're here," she called, waving them over. "We're just getting everything set up for the mentorship program. I could use some extra hands." "Of course," Derek said, nodding. He handed his backpack to Mike, then turned to Ms. Thompson. "What do you need me to do?" She handed him a clipboard, her eyes shining with excitement. "We're pairing up some of the older kids with younger ones for the mentorship program. It's going to be a great way for them to connect, to learn from each other. Could you help with the introductions?" Derek nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Absolutely, I'd love to." He spent the next hour moving around the community center, introducing the older kids to the younger ones, helping them get comfortable with each other. He watched as the kids started to connect, the initial shyness giving way to laughter and conversation. It made him smile, seeing how quickly they warmed up to each other, how eager they were to help. One of the older boys, Chris, had been paired with a younger girl named Mia. Derek watched as Chris showed Mia how to make a paper airplane, his voice gentle as he explained each step. Mia's eyes lit up as she followed along, her fingers carefully folding the paper. When she finally flew the airplane across the room, her laughter was bright and filled with joy. Derek felt a warmth spread through him as he watched them. This was what it was all about, creating a space where everyone felt safe, where they could learn and grow together. It was something bigger than himself, something he was proud to be a part of. As the mentorship session wrapped up, Ms. Thompson walked over to Derek, her eyes filled with pride. "You did an amazing job today, Derek," she said, her voice soft. "The kids look up to you, you know. You're a real role model for them." Derek looked down, his face flushing. "I'm just trying to help out, Ms. Thompson." She smiled, patting his shoulder. "And you're doing more than that. You're changing lives." After the program ended and most of the kids had gone home, Derek stayed behind to help clean up. He was stacking chairs when he heard someone call his name. He turned to see the old man, his face bright with a smile, walking over. "Derek," the old man said, his voice filled with warmth. "I just wanted to see how everything went today. Looks like it was a success." Derek nodded, smiling. "Yeah, it was great. The kids really seemed to enjoy it." The old man looked around the room, his eyes softening. "You know, this place, it's become something truly special. And it's all thanks to you." Derek shook his head quickly. "It's not just me, it's everyone. Ms. Thompson, the volunteers, the kids. It's all of us." The old man nodded, his eyes glistening. "You're right. It is all of us. But you were the spark, Derek. You reminded me, and everyone here, that kindness can change everything." Derek swallowed, his throat tightening. He looked down at his hands, the weight of the old man's words settling in his chest. I wanted to help. That's all." The old man reached out, placing his hand on Derek's shoulder. "And you did. You helped more than you'll ever know." They stood there for a moment, the warmth of the community center wrapping around them, the echoes of laughter and conversation still lingering in the air. Derek looked around, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many lives to touch, so many opportunities to make a difference, and he was ready for it. Later that evening, Derek walked home with Lisa by his side. The air was cold, but the warmth of the day's events filled him, keeping the chill at bay. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their steps echoing on the empty street. "You know, Derek," Lisa said suddenly, her voice soft, "I think you're going to do amazing things. I think this is just the start." Derek looked over at her, his heart skipping a beat. "You think so?" She nodded, her eyes bright as she met his gaze. "Yeah, you've got something special, Derek. You care about people, and that makes all the difference." Derek smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Thanks, Lisa. I couldn't have done any of this without you and everyone else." She reached over, taking his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "We're all in this together, right?" "Right," Derek said, his smile widening. They walked the rest of the way home like that, their hands clasped, the cold night air around them, but the warmth of hope and connection filling the space between them. When they reached Derek's building, they stopped, turning to face each other. "I'll see you tomorrow?" Lisa asked, her voice filled with warmth. "Yeah," Derek said, nodding. "I'll be there." She smiled, giving his hand a final squeeze before turning and walking away. Derek watched her go, his heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. He turned and headed inside, climbing the stairs to his apartment. His mom was waiting for him when he walked in, her eyes bright as she looked up from the couch. "How'd it go today, baby?" she asked. Derek smiled, slipping off his jacket and hanging it on the back of a chair. "It went great, Mom. Everything's really coming together." She nodded, her eyes filled with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Derek. You've made something amazing happen." Derek walked over, sitting down beside her. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." She reached over, pulling him into a hug, her arms wrapping around him tightly. "You're a good boy, Derek, and I know this is just the beginning." Derek closed his eyes, leaning into the hug, feeling the warmth of his mom's love. He knew she was right. This was just the beginning. There were still so many people to help, so many lives to touch, and he was ready for whatever came next. He had found his place, his purpose, and he wasn't going to let it go. As he lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, Derek felt a sense of peace settle over him. The watch on his wrist ticked softly, a reminder that every moment mattered, that every day was a chance to do something meaningful. And he knew that he would make every second count, because kindness changes everything.